Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar today, where we're going to have a look at all things cell count this spring. So we're going to have a chat about managing mastitis treatment protocols. We're also going to introduce genocells, which is the future of milk recording. So I'm delighted to have with me today your cells online, and thanks for making the time. Hopefully you can hear this online well. And even if you can't see it, we'll have the slides and the presentation available later on a recording. So it'll be all up on Tirlán Farm Life. As you've got questions today, just text them through to us. We'll see them in the chat, or text them to myself on my mobile, or any of your milk supply managers will feed them into us as well. And we'll try and incorporate your questions. We're going to try to keep today very question focused and actually respond to anything that you've got out there that you want an answer on as you're trying to navigate through this spring. Who have we got with us today? I've got Kevin O'Neill from Progressive Genetics. Kevin is going to talk to us about what's actually happening in the genocell space, which is all about the new direction that milk recording is going to take. I've got Garvan from the Department of Ag. Caroline is going to take us through the new National Veterinary Medicines Prescription Service. So this will actually give you some insights. If you've got any questions about interacting with you this year around medicines, not just mastitis, this is the time to send them in, because we've got Caroline here who can give a really good rundown of that. I've got Joris Summers. You all know Joris from our team, and Joris is going to be there, and he's going to take some day-to-day questions on mastitis and also run through what are the things to remember just at the moment when things are really busy on farm and you're really trying to calf cows down well and get them started in a really good way this spring. So just to kick off, I'm just going to cover off one small thing. What is mastitis? So we always get to chat about this at the start of these sort of things. It's just to remind everybody, if the cows have got mastitis, they've got an inflammation of the mammary gland. Essentially, they've got bacterial infection. It's entered the mammary gland, or it's been there latent and it's resprung up. The bacteria multiply and cause an infection, and then what we see is the cow's immune system reacts to the infection, and that gives a really big rise in cell count, and that's what we see, and that's what we're measuring. So it's all about controlling where the bacteria are coming from, and where are they coming from? The environment or other cows. It's as simple as that. That's where it comes from. So the hard bit then can be about controlling that, especially during a really busy time, and this is typically, it doesn't get much busier than this on farm. Somebody asked me yesterday, where are cell counts running at the moment? Across business at the moment, we're seeing about 190,000, which is a typical average for this side of the year. Last year, we finished up at about 178,000 across, if you were to pick a number and do an average across Tirlán's intake. And the cell check data over the last number of years has shown us that cell counts are varying between maybe 165, 170,000 to about 180,000 across the year. So at the moment, we're having a good spring, and that's really helpful. Not too much bad weather really does make it a little bit easier to get cows out, and cows out of sheds does make it easier for everybody. Housing is probably, in a way, it's quite controlled because you're liming and things like that, but the pressures are more when housing is under pressure and when you're actually dealing with bad weather. So again, no different than trying to get more energy into cows' diets. If you can get cows out to grass this spring, it is better for your cell count. Contagious mastitis versus environmental mastitis. One is coming from the environment, so it's all around the cubicles. Getting cows out after milking and keeping them standing for 30 minutes is key. Plenty of teat dip. Contagious mastitis, that moves between cows, and it's basically the infected milk in the liners or on your hands or around the area if she's lying down on cubicle mats, and that's how it spreads. Things like Staph aureus, strep ag, strep uterus, they're the contagious ones. And the environmental ones that we see, strep uterus, E. coli, and dysgalactia. So we'll chat about those a little bit more, and you can ask any questions as we go along to either of the vets. One of the ones that people are always wondering about is, what if you can't see it and you just see this high cell count? What is that? And that is subclinical mastitis. There's no clots, it's very hard to see, it's hard to pick up, but if you're seeing a constantly high cell count and you still can't see anything on the filter or when you draw out cows, she's probably, some of you heard have got subclinical mastitis, and that's where your milk recording comes in. The rule of thumb is that uninfected cows have cell counts very low, under 100,000 is very common. When you're cell count is rising above 200,000, that usually indicates that an infection has occurred in individual cows. And different individual bacteria cause different patterns. So you can see reactions take time, and it could be very different. Staph aureus is notorious for being high today, low tomorrow, high today, low tomorrow, and very head wrecking because you think you have it sorted, but then it pops back up again. So it's all about just managing it as best you can, especially at this time of the year. So you've heard enough from me, so I'm going to switch over to Kevin O'Neill and introduce him from Progressive Genetics. Delighted to have Kevin here. It's not often, Kevin, that we have something brand new and shiny to talk about when we're talking about mastitis. So Kevin's going to give a rundown on what the GenoCell service is, and this is coming your way this year and really has potential to be a game changer on farm. Over to you, Kevin, and thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Fionnuala. I hope everyone can hear me now properly. But look, like Fionnuala has introduced, my name is Kevin O'Neill. I'm from Progressive Genetics. I'm involved in the milk recording side of the house, and I suppose over the last 2 years, my main focus has been on a service called GenoCells. So some of you may have heard of GenoCells, some of you actually may have been involved in trials that have been done at GenoCells over the last 2 years. But basically, what is GenoCells? So GenoCells, it's a revolutionary new technology that will allow us to identify the highest contributors to bulk tank somatic cell count by genotyping a single milk sample. So basically, we take one sample from the milk tank, we do a genotype on that, and then we can tell you which cows are putting the most cell count into the tank. So how does all that actually work? So each animal has unique DNA. That DNA is in every cell in the animal, which includes her somatic cells. When we genotype the cow, we know this DNA. Therefore, we can look in the sample of milk for that DNA and assign a responsibility. In simple terms, the more DNA of an animal present in the sample, the higher her contribution and theoretical cell count. So when we do our sampling and do our testing, we get out a percentage figure, which is the cow's percentage cellular responsibility. Obviously, a percentage figure is of little context when we're dealing with cell count and dealing with problems. So what we then do with that figure is we take that percentage, we get the proportion of the milk volume, which is from your milk recording. So we'll take that yield, we'll take the cell count that we got from the sample, and we will basically be able to band your cows. So we'll be able to tell you a rough estimate of the cell count of every cow that's going into the tank. So this year going forward, we have started with the following bands. So we will be banding your cows in 0 to 50. 51 to 199, 200 to 249, 250 to 499, 500 to 999, and then 1 million plus. So all your cows will fit into one of them bands depending on their cellular responsibility. So obviously with anything, there is a few requirements, I suppose, to get involved in the GenoCells program and to start submitting samples. So the first and most important thing is that all cows in the herd must be genotyped prior to starting your GenoCells program. You must also be a member of ICVF Herd Plus, so the sample does have to be submitted through an app, and that is done through the ICVF Herd Plus app. You must be signed up to complete 4 milk recordings in the calendar year, and at least 1 milk recording must be completed. Now again, that is done so we can band your cows. Without yield and without milk recording, all we have is a list of percentages, which, like we said, provides very little context when you're dealing with issues or when you're trying to find out what cows are the problem cows, who is an issue here, So that's why we need herds to continue milk recording to be a part of the GenoCells program. So the GenoCells sign-up process, what will you, the farmers, have to do if you decide, I think GenoCells has a place to play on my farm? So it is important to note GenoCells is not yet commercially available, and we are hoping to have it available in the next 6 to 8 weeks. There is a few little things that I suppose have come back from the trials we've done last year, which still need to be ironed out around testing, around how we're going to transport samples, etc. But we're nearly there now. So what we are doing is taking expressions of interest. So if you're on the call today and you think that's something I will be interested when it is available, what you can do is you can contact us here in the milk card office in Progressive Genetics. We'll put you on a list and we will contact you as soon as it is available. The other number I have in there is Munster Bovine. So I am conscious that there is possibly people on this call who aren't milk recording at Progressive Genetics and are milk recording at Munster Bovine. Munster Bovine are also offering the GenoCell service. So that is their phone number. Again, they're doing something similar. If you are recording with Munster Bovine, they will facilitate your genus cell samples. I suppose it's just a small bit of housekeeping for your own information. The genus cells license, it's a three-way agreement between Progressive Genetics, Munster Bovine and ICBF, and it's available to PG and milk record, or PG and Munster Bovine milk recording herds only. Right. I think that's a whistle-stop tour of genus cells.
No, that's super, Kevin. We asked him to keep it nice and short, but I guess, Kevin, if I go back, that very first line there, because I've got two questions in, why would you genus cell instead of milk recording? You know, would you not just stick with milk recording? Is it more accurate? But actually, for me, it's that first line there, Kevin, where it's a single bull tank milk sample. That's the key to this, isn't it? And that's, you know, for someone who is milk recording, particularly big herds, this might be a really good way of getting information in between milk recordings. That's the big difference, isn't it, Kevin?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think that single sample is massive. You know, obviously we still require herds to milk record, but there is probably people out there who would like to do. They'd like more information, but they don't want to do any more than 4 milk recordings. You know, so I suppose for them farmers, it'd be an ideal fit to put in between your milk recordings. So that basically we get that information, and then at the end of the year, be it around, you know, during the lactation, I suppose you'll be able to make decisions, and then again at the end of the year, you'll have all the information. But look, yeah, the single sample is it's brilliant.
So in theory, if I was trying to manage cell count and farm, if I do my early milk recording in spring, which I guess that's the new advice with milk recording, is that if you do it a little bit early, you get that really good feedback of what worked from your dry cow treatments, whether your selective worked or whether your actual treatments worked. So once you have that done, particularly maybe in the busy time around breeding and stuff like that, that's when your genus cell sample might come in quite handy. Very easy to take a bulk tank cell count or a bulk tank sample. You'll have special bottles, Kevin. I've had 2 questions here. Who takes it? How many do we need? How many milkings in each sample?
Yeah, so it'll be looked at, the farmer will take it themselves. So whenever they deem fit that they need a sample or they need results, they'll take the sample themselves and sell it and send it whatever day of the week that they take it. So it's only 1 milking in the tank. That is the one thing we do require, that there is only 1 milking in the sample. The farmer can send it away then whenever they see fit to get the testing done. And then again, I suppose, look, it's down to individual preference as regards how many you would or wouldn't like to do, you know. Some farmers may try and fit them in at the start of the year period, say, right, okay, we'll do one after the first recording, like you said, after that early recording, we'll do one around the busy breeding time, silage time, all that. Then we'll fall back into our milk recording routine, maybe put in another one at the end of the year or before that last test, whatever way it fit in. So look, you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Farmers will find what way this works for them, I suppose, as we get into the programme.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. We'll come back, and yeah, look, if anybody can text in questions or email us or put them in on the chat, our number is 086 180 3947, or email to questions@tirlanfarmlife.com, and we'll actually do a full question session when everybody's had a bit of a when every presenter has had a chance to go through their piece. So we'll be back to you again, Kevin, and thank you for that. Joris, we're going to switch over to you now, I think. Just, I suppose, the real basics of it. How do you stay on top of cell count in the first 60 days of lactation? So breaking it down as easily as you can for everybody, Joris.
Okay, thank you, Fionnuala. And I've tried to condense it all in this one slide on the screen. All the information is on the one image here. So really looking at the first 2 months of the lactation, and most herds are well into the calving season now, and it's really starting to ramp up. So how do you stay on top of a cell count, a good cell count, or how do you if you come out of a lactation last year where maybe cell count was a bit of a struggle, you're starting off okay now, how do you stay on top of that? So really the first thing is, throughout the calving season, keep a watch on the calving pen hygiene. Okay, we all understand how during the calving season things built up, and we see this in the calving pen, we see it in the calf house, but from a cell count and mastitis perspective, the calving pen is very important. So make sure you keep adding plenty of fresh, dry straw, add some lime, keep the pressure off the cows from an infectious point of view from these environmental bacteria mainly. If you have cows and heifers already running milk in the calving pen, or even before they go into the calving pen, it's probably even more so, use some teat spray, because if milk can come out of the teat, bacteria can go the other direction, right? So the teats are open, you have to use some teat spray to disinfect them and keep them clean. By the way, if you have heifers that are really showing, I suppose, a good bit of pressure on their udder and udder edema, if you will, are really swelling up, if they're close enough to calving, let's say in the last week before calving, you can actually take the pressure off them, milk them, but keep in mind, this is really valuable colostrum that they're producing. So freeze that colostrum until they actually calve, and then you can give that colostrum to their calf. So don't waste it, right? It's still of high value, but it does take a bit of that pressure away for the heifer. Her swelling will go down and she'll be less uncomfortable. If you have the option, maybe try and calve your heifers in a separate calving pen. The heifers are the ones that are under the most pressure now, right? It's their first calving. Everything is changing for them. They're ending up in a new herd. They have to find their place in that herd. A lot of stress involved there. Stress alone can lower their immune system on top of what's happening around calving anyway. So if you can actually calve them separately, you give them a little bit of extra comfort and keep them away from maybe the bullying cows, but also the more contaminated environment and the bacteria that the more mature cows may have some level of immunity to that the heifers don't. If you have animals in cubicles, be it the dry cows, be it the early lactation cows, make sure you keep those cubicles clean and lime them twice a day. Also, as calves as cows are calving down, you start adding more and more cows to the milking cow shed or part of the shed. Make sure you always have enough cubicles for those animals. So that means nearly on a daily basis, you need to go and allocate cubicles to your dry cows, cubicles to your milking cows, and you have to change whichever way you're closing off a section of the cubicle shed or whatever. You have to make sure that moves with the changing dynamics of your herd, and that you then also run the scrapers at a frequency that is sufficient to deal with the number of cows that are coming into the milking cow herd, so that they're always at a clean underfoot conditions and not dragging muck into the cubicles and things like that. When it comes to milking and Fionnuala, you've already hinted at it there. One of the key things now, while the animals are still being housed, is that when they come out of the parlour, that they cannot go back into the cubicle straight away. They can't go and lie down. They have to be able to stand up for about half an hour after milking for the teat to fully close again, and so that it puts up an extra barrier against bacteria trying to get into the teat. So have them locked in at the feed barrier if you have lock and head gates, or try and close off cubicles, anything that will keep them standing for half an hour. And then one key thing, and something that I see all the time that is actually being missed, is scrape your collecting yard after each milking. Because by the evening milking, that muck, if that is still there, the cows come in full of milk, running milk, teats are open, and they go in, splash this around, and whatever slurry and muck that was left there from the morning milking could splash up onto the udder and could infect that cow. So that's a key thing that I think we need to keep on top of, that hygiene. When it comes to the actual milking routine, look, there are the basics, wear your clean gloves for each milking. If you tear a glove, put on a new one. Don't have your skin exposed. That's really what this comes down to. Okay, your hands are a very easy way of transporting bacteria from one cow to the next. So try and have clean, intact gloves. Your post-milking teat disinfection, very important. Make sure you're using enough of it, right? So 15 ml per cow per milking is what that looks like. Change your liners if you haven't done so during the winter when the parlour was being used less or not at all. Then really think about doing this. I know it's a busy time now, but if you have changed your liners recently, already do the sums. When are you going to reach your 2000 milkings? And for a lot of herds that have it in their head that, oh, this is in 6 months time, I can tell you right now it's probably 4 months. So do the sums. When is every cluster going to have completed 2000 milkings, and you need to change the liners then. Obviously stay on top of your routine machine maintenance, and then the milk recording, and Kevin is just after telling us about the genocells, and a milk recording is still a very, very important part of that. Now, raising the bar on top of that, make sure you stick to the force stripping, okay? Force stripping of cows, especially these cows early in lactation, everybody's still coming into a routine. Try and identify problems early, and force stripping is the best way to do that. An extra step is obviously doing a CMT or a paddle test on those animals, or sending off an individual cow sample for cell count testing if that's what you'd like to do between milk recordings to get an accurate reading. But the CMT paddle is brilliant at giving you some indication of which quarter is high and which ones are fine. If you do have cows with cell count problems, try and introduce some level of segregation. So either dipping clusters after a high cell count cow is milked before the cluster goes on to another cow. Obviously, if you have the option of introducing a cluster flush system, that works too. But if it's just a temporary measure that you want to take now, dipping clusters in peracetic acid, for example, does work. Or alternatively, bunch your high cell count cows together and just run them through the parlor last. Milk them as the last ones, because that makes sure they can't spread whatever infection they have onto the non-high cell count cows. Quite often, maybe heifers, very new into the herd, low cell count. The last thing you want to happen is that they pick up an infection from an old cow, and now their career might be ruined already. Okay, and then as a fourth step, try and start building a bank of culture and sensitivity results. I'm not saying take a sample today and send it in immediately, but if you have an animal that comes up with a high cell count, identify the quarter that is really the one causing the trouble and take a sample from that before that animal receives any treatment. If your treatment is successful, great. Keep that sample in the freezer. If the result of your treatment is not acceptable, you can still send in a frozen sample. But what you can also do is keep a couple of these samples together throughout the spring, send them in as a group and have them tested, and it'll give you some really good insights as to what bacteria are causing mastitis in your cows, and that will drive what measures you should take, very tailored to your herd, and how you can control that. So that's really it for me, Fionnuala.
That's great. Thanks for that, Joris. I've got a couple of quick questions that have come in, so I'll just give them to you before we switch over to Caroline. One, very to the point, how important is peracetic acid in a cluster flush system?
Well, look, it's a disinfectant in that sense, right? So it's for equipment, obviously, that it's not a teat spray, but it is one of those products that has been shown to work well on the contact surfaces. Now, obviously, it only works well if it's at the right concentration and if it's also clean. So quite often you will see that the buckets of peracetic acid that are being used for cluster dipping get too dirty during milking. There might only be one bucket for the whole parlor. That's not sufficient, guys. Okay, you need to have the clusters go in there relatively clean so that they don't contaminate the disinfectant with milk, with muck. And also, if you have to change over the bucket during milking, it needs to remain effective. Otherwise, it's of no use to you. But yeah, peracetic acid has been shown to be very good at doing that contact surface disinfection.
Yeah, and also just to add to that, the important thing, particularly calibrating a cluster flush system, double check what rate and what strength of peracetic acid you have, because there are various ones out there. One last question, and then we'll come back to, I've got lots of questions coming in on heifers. Basically, if you're including fresh heifers, will that increase the cell count? And how long does it take to settle down? How long will they take to settle down? If they're not infected, I guess, if it's a sort of
so it's a stress.
It's a stress. Yeah.
Yes. So normally, right, in a calm herd, after a couple of days, the heifers will find their place, they'll find a routine, and things will settle down. But there is always that piece of 8 milkings is how long the milk should not go into the bulk tank to start with, right? And I suppose in general, we would assume that after the 8 milkings, the cell counts are also starting to settle down. So even in those heifers, you would expect that at the end of their first week, their cell count should be reflective of what they are without an infection. So I would give it, a number of days, but maybe up to a week is how I, it's hard to say because heifers react differently than cows. Cows find their routine again better than heifers find it.
Yeah.
They're quicker to respond to, oh yeah, this is what we're doing now, we're being milked again. Heifers just don't know what's happening really. But normally after a week, you would see that the stress has gone out of their system more or less, and that their cell count is dropping to what is the normal baseline.
And I suppose, look, one very last one on heifers, and then we'll switch over to Caroline. Heifers showing clots, Joris, quite early on, and the farmer is doing good bedding, good cubicles, so he doesn't think that it's environmental. What's the reason that heifers might get mastitis, and particularly clotty mastitis at an early stage? Is that as simple as just assuming that they're still stressed, or is it that they're starting to pick up infections from other cows? And this is very specifically, he sounds like he's on the text, he's saying that, yeah, there are actually showing clots. So it's not someone it's not a heifer that's just showing high on a paddle, but not actually having clots.
Yeah, look, in general, you would say if there's clots in the milk, it's something that's been there for, I wouldn't say a long time, but it's a bit more chronic than no clots in the milk, right? So I would say that there's some type of an infection. Now, there are other causes of mastitis than just those environmental bacteria that you're dealing with from, by keeping the hygiene up and so on, and fresh straw and lime and cubicle scraping and all of those things. I mean, heifers can pick up infections, even things like lepto or a mycoplasma infection, for example, right? That can hit heifers really hard if they have not been exposed or haven't been vaccinated against leptospirosis. And that can give them a serious mastitis, usually in multiple quarters, even at that. Okay, so there is a piece there that heifers do react more severely to some infections that the cows are very well able to cope with. So if I would see heifers with clots, I would assume they have an infection, and it's about identifying what infection it is and using a suitable treatment then. Yes.
Okay, so probably good to engage with your vet or your advisor straight away and just get some extra help there to get that sorted. It's great. Thanks, Joris. We will be back to you. We're going to switch over to Caroline. And again, just a reminder to everybody, keep sending your questions in. We're getting lots of them here, and we will try and cover all of those. So just going to move on to Caroline. So Caroline, we're delighted to have Caroline with us. Caroline is actually the head of the One Health Veterinary Medicine and Antimicrobial Resistance Department in the Department of Ag. So it's great to have her here. She's going to give an insight. A lot of you will probably have heard Caroline speak maybe at some of the cell check workshops across the country in the last couple of years, where she's done a lot around the dry cow management. And we're delighted to have Caroline. She's going to concentrate today actually on managing mastitis day to day and managing, I suppose, the new changes that have come in that will affect you during, I suppose, this spring. So welcome, Caroline, and thank you very much for coming along to us. We're delighted to have you.
Thanks very, very much, Fionnuala. And look, it's great to be here, and it's great to hear all the practical tips that have come from the previous two speakers. Really interested in Kevin's presentation, absolutely, about this genocell technology. It's fabulous that we're moving to that kind of space. So I'm going to cover, I suppose, as you said, the legislative changes and what that means, I suppose, day to day at farm level for dairy farmers. And I suppose you're all aware now of the move to selective dry cow therapy, and the driver behind that is really human health, to reduce antibiotic in animal health as well as in humans, but big focus on animal health to protect our own health when we go into hospital so that antibiotics continue to work. So it's all about reducing use, but it's also saying we use them when they're necessary. And so this is a guide it was a guidance, a code of practice. This was developed by farmers, vets and advisors in the dairy sector to look at how the sector can use antibiotics strategically and in a targeted way into the future, but very much saying that we still need to use them, but we need to consider how we use them to ensure we use them appropriately. So this guide, you'll get this, I'm sure, Fionnuala, do you have copies of this, or it's available online anyway on the department's website if anyone can find it, but it just highlights some of the key strategies that you can do to reduce antibiotic use. Particularly, can I just go back to that slide? Yeah, just it talks about the whole improved husbandry, and I think Joris has covered a lot of that in terms of, you know, mastitis control. It is about farm management. Can you still hear me? Because it's saying to me I'm no longer live. Am I okay? Yeah.
Yeah, you're okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
Grant. So look, just again, it's all about disease prevention. Less disease, less antibiotics, and it talks about, you know, getting your veterinary involved and to give you that diagnosis so that you know what bacteria is causing the mastitis. Is it environmental? Is it E. coli, or is it Staph aureus? Is it coming from the cow behind her in the parlour? So getting your diagnosis right and treating with the right antibiotic, and that's where it comes down to having this information, having your SCC, but also doing your culture and susceptibility testing, which will tell you what bacteria you have, if it is a bacteria, and what antibiotic will work. And then the key thing is that you use the right dose. You treat her for the weight that she is, and you give it for long enough. So they're just some key tips in that code, and it carries across into what the legislation now requires us to do. So if I could move on to the next slide, please. Thanks a million. So I just want to emphasize that this new legislation, it puts a lot of controls around what vets can do. And you may have found that, you know, when you go into your vet now, particularly I suppose for the dry cow tubes, that, you know, heretofore you may have been getting tubes for all your cows, but now the vet has to do the selection of the cows that need the tubes. And this is because vets now, they have to be able to justify how they issue prescriptions for antibiotics, because of this concern about human health. So they have to do either examine the animal or carry out a proper assessment of the cow or the heifer. And so they don't have to go out and look at every cow that gets a suspected case of mastitis, but they do have to have the information. And that's where that GeneCell technology, the milk recording, that feeds into the vet being better able to decide what I need to do at the herd level and at the cow level. The other control that's in the legislation is vets now, the amount of antibiotics being used is coming under a lot of scrutiny. And like other countries have been looking at this for a lot longer than us with databases. But the legislation is saying the vet can only prescribe the amount needed to treat the animal at the time. Now, obviously, there's a concern that you would be left on farm with no available antibiotics, and you could be milking a cow in the evening and you would have nothing to treat her with. So we are considering this, but at the moment our position is that, you know, vets, it's up to them to decide how much you might need in an emergency situation when they're not able to get out to you, when you're not able to get into the office to get something. And so we have, at the moment, our consideration is that you would have enough to treat up to 10% of your herd. Now that is up to the vet to decide. But what I'm trying to say is that, you know, you won't be left with no antibiotics on your farm, because that would obviously raise animal health and welfare issues. So that is the way we are working it at the moment. But we are being audited by the Commission on this legislation later this year. So, you know, we'll have to see what they say, but that's where we feel it should land at the moment. There's no routine use of antibiotics. So again, that's going back to look at maybe what we did 10, 15 years ago. We can't continue to do that if it's routine use, because of the problem in human health in our hospitals. The antibiotics are not as effective as they were. So again, it's about looking at your biosecurity, looking at your animal husbandry, your milking practices, your routine, to kind of reduce the need to use antibiotics. So again, these are the controls that are on the vets before they can prescribe antibiotics. Now they have to consider this. And when cows calve down now in springtime and you think you may have a problem with mastitis, it is up to the vet to make a decision to make sure that the correct antibiotic is being used if it's needed. And they have to look at the risk. They have to look at it at the farm level, but at the cow and really at the quarter level. And that's why having all this extra information, having your records, is so important. So just to quickly talk about the other key changes, there's some slight changes in the records you have to keep. The prescriptions, I've talked about the controls around prescribing, but as of the 13th of January, we have now launched an electronic prescribing database, and I'll talk to you about how that works. So essentially, Since the 13th of January, vets are required to use this system. Now, it's fair to say some of you may be still getting paper prescriptions because it's a huge change. And so vets are working towards it, but we would be expecting all vets to be using it before the end of May, and I'll explain why that is the case later on. But essentially how this system works is that the vet, as I said, will either examine the cow, the heifer, or do this proper assessment, use the information that they have, whether it's your milk recording, your previous cases of mastitis, and decide whether you need a prescription or not. But instead of giving you a paper prescription, they send, if they give you the medicine at the time, you will get an email to your email address, which will have the prescription on it. So you won't get a paper prescription. Now, if you really want to have one, the vet can print one out for you, but the original, if you like, will go to your email account. If you don't want to get the medicines from the vet, if you're going somewhere else to get it, whatever it is, you will get a text message to a phone. And that text message will have a code which you bring and you show to whoever is dispensing, wherever you're going to get the medicine. Say if you're going to the co-op to get your tubes, whatever, you bring in your phone and you present that code. If you don't have a phone, you can just get this code written out on a piece of paper and you can give that to whoever is dispensing it for you. And if you don't have an email address, the vet can print out the paper version. So we are providing for people that may not be as you know, using as much technology as everyone else, but really this is where we have to go in terms of having this centralized database, because we get audits all the time and we're asked, what is your level of antibiotic use in dairy calves? What is your level of use in beef cattle? We don't know. But this system will allow us to have that data. We have to have it anyway. We have to legally required to have this usage data and submit it every year to Europe. So this is the system that we see will work, and it should add efficiency, but it is a significant change, and we fully understand that. So just quickly, the record keeping, just to tell you, there's a couple of extra requirements that you have to have. Really, it's just the actual date the withdrawal period expires for the medicine that you use. And you also have to keep a record of any unused medicine and how you disposed of it. Now, you can, many of you may bring your medicines back to your vet, or there have been collection sites around the country. There was a pilot last year, and it's likely there'll be a pilot again this year. But this is to get rid of all that waste, medicines waste that you have on farm, because there is a risk of leaching into the soil, leaching into the environment of these medicines, and again driving AMR. So this is a legal requirement that you have this record of how you dispose of the medicines. And then finally, I just want to make you aware of, from mid-June, and this is why all vets need to be using the electronic database by the end of May. From mid-June, all antiparasitics for food-producing animals, so that's dairy, cattle, beef, sheep, will need a prescription for antiparasitics. So for your doses, your drenches, your fluke treatments, they will need a prescription from mid-June of this year. And that is because of the growing problem of resistance. A lot of these drenches are not working in some herds. Bigger problem possibly on the sheep side, but it means that we're no longer entitled to keep them without a prescription. So that is changing. We're the only country in Europe that doesn't require a prescription. So again, I understand this is a big change. You will be still able to get a prescription and go to your co-op. So if you normally don't get your dose or your drench from your vet, that's not going to change. But you just will need a prescription to get the product. And then the other thing to say is the department is funding up to 30,000 additional TASA programs. These where you get veterinary advice about 2 hours, and it's free of charge, and the vet will come out and do the taser. You probably, hope many of you have done the cell check ones, that either the dry cow or the cell check solutions, but there will be funding for an extra 30,000 of these, and one of them will be around biosecurity. And in that taser, you can look at your parasite control, you can look at your use and develop a parasite prevention program. And this will, I suppose, allow you to, if you need a prescription through that taser, you will be able to get a prescription for your antiparasitics. So I think that's most of what I wanted to cover, Fionnuala. So any questions, please feel free to send them in.
That's great, Caroline. Thank you for that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And yeah, we've got lots of questions. So we'll so thank you for that, Caroline. I think I was on mute. So thank you very much for that. We're going to go straight to the questions now. Actually, this one is for you, Caroline. My vet is looking for an animal identification number for all antibiotics purchased. And you've gone through the background of why that is, but you just want to make a comment on that, that's the vet is actually just trying to do what he needs to do at the moment, and that things have changed. Yeah, now the vet doesn't have to put a tag number down for every animal on the system when they're issuing a prescription. We have allowed for up to 5 animals to be identified, and then the vet can just put down group treatment. Okay. But at the end of the day, you're recording the use in your medicines record. So if you don't have the tag at the time, and we have told the vets this, they can just put in some other way of identifying. If it was a freeze brand number, that's acceptable. The key thing is you know which animal to treat and you record the treatment. Okay, and the next question is, how can I have antibiotics in store for future case of mastitis? The farmer is saying that he can't know ahead of time which cows will have mastitis. So how does he deal with that? Can he anticipate? So this is somebody who wants to stay on top of it. Yeah, sure. So as I said, we are allowing for you to have a certain amount on farm, and what the vets will put on the prescription, they won't identify the animal specifically. It'll be put down as for emergency treatment, and then the key thing is that you record it correctly and you have that conversation with your vet, so that you're not using it without having that conversation with your vet, so he or she knows what you're doing. Yeah, so you can have a bit on standby and then you record. That's fair enough. Another question, are the vets going to be charging for each of the prescriptions, and will that be regulated? We won't get into the commercial aspect of that. It's not what we do. So I can't really comment on that. I'm sorry. Conversation for each vet, I guess. Yeah. And I guess, that's important that farmers go and ask their vets, maybe now before you actually have the emergency need for it, to actually ask them ahead of time, well, what do we need ahead of time for getting, we were talking about mastitis, but for getting antibiotics to deal with mastitis cases and things like that. Okay, thank you for that. Joris, quick question for you. Is 1 cubicle per cow enough in a farm situation, or do you really need a few more to have spares?
Ideally, you have a few more, okay? I know the cell check guidelines actually say you should have 10% extra for that. And I would say absolutely, 5% extra to me is a minimal. And that has to do with cubicle occupancy. If you have 1 cubicle per cow, that means that, yes, all cows in theory could lie down together, but it is a massive occupancy. So it puts extra pressure on maintaining hygiene within the cubicle house, because some cubicles don't get used by cows and they all want the same preferential cubicles. So you're not giving cows any choice, and you're exposing them to that unhygienic environment then all the time because there's so much pressure on the system. Whereas if you introduce that 5%, that 10% extra cubicles, you take a little bit of the pressure off, and you're also giving cows that choice of where they would actually prefer to lie down. Cows maybe prefer to lie down to the same cow, next to the same cow all the time. Well, by giving additional cubicles, you're allowing for that. And there is a lot of animal welfare implications there for giving cows that choice in where they lie down, rather than having it restricted to 1 cubicle per cow. Okay, thanks for that, Joris. We're very near our time, but we're going to run over it because we've got lots of questions. So we'll keep going if that's okay with all my presenters and anyone online. I'm going to try to make sure we cover everybody's questions. Question
I'm treating cows with mastitis. If they don't respond, and the treatment is recommended after 3 treatments, so if they don't respond after 3 treatments, which is what it says on the box, how long should I keep treating for if she hasn't cleared up? What do I do?
I'll
Joris,
take
that's
that
another
one.
for you.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
take that one. Well, my recommendation is you have to speak to your vet. Okay, the vet had initially prescribed the treatment that you're using. They had a reason and a justification for using that treatment. So either they may recommend, well, you have to keep going for a little bit longer with the existing treatment because maybe they have evidence from culture and sensitivity to show that this is the indicated solution, or they may decide to actually, okay, given that the treatment that was initially chosen hasn't worked, we're going to change it to something else. But you have to have the conversation with the vet that prescribed the treatment in the first place. And when you are doing that, always keep in mind that once this clears up again, that you check that the cow is clear of antibiotic residues, because if you go beyond, yeah, exactly. If you go beyond what is, I suppose, the licensed treatment duration, you do have to verify that the withdrawal time is also been extended, that the antibiotic has actually cleared from the cow before it goes back into the tank. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're going beyond the 3-day standard treatment for whatever tubes you were using. Yeah.
Okay, and just reminding everybody, you can talk to any of the milk supply team about getting hold of charm testers or Delvo testers just to stay on top of that, because the last thing you need is an accidental antibiotic positive this side of the year. Question for you, Kevin. Actually, 2. What's the cost of Genocells, and why would you go with Genocells versus milk recording? Is the milk recording more accurate because it's not banded data, or what's the biggest benefit, and then the cost?
Yeah, well, I suppose, look, starting with the cost. So the cost is €3.50 per cow per test. So that's based off if you do 1 test or if you do 2 tests, it's €3.50 per cow per test. And then I suppose the second part of the question, we have done a big trial over the last 2 years, really, with, I think, the bones of 100 herds involved in the 2 different trials. So we looked at the accuracy of the data, and it is very accurate when compared to milk recording. I suppose the banding is there because, look, like, cell count will fluctuate. You know, cow 50 today will be 60 tomorrow, will be 70 the day after. So we don't put an exact figure on it, but it gives an indication of where that cow is on a particular day. But as regards one over the other, I suppose, look, milk recording will always be the gold standard. That'll always be your sample per cow, which will give you an exact reading. But Genocells will fit in nicely, I suppose, to give more information at certain different, times of the year where you wouldn't necessarily have done a milk recording before, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So from what I'm hearing from you, Kevin, similar costs per cow, but actually the difference is you're taking 1 sample. So you've it done in 3.5 seconds, really.
Basically, like, to most farmers now, it has to be submitted on an app and whatnot, because to be selected, but it's a 10-minute process, 15-minute process. We'll provide everything. All you need is just the phone and the app, and envelopes, prepaid, all that. That'll all be done. Literally just post a sample and wait for your results.
Okay, great. Another question on milk recording. When should I do it? If the cows aren't all in the herd, do I wait, or should I be doing it early? There was a lot of, and to be fair, that was one of the messages we were getting out in the dry cow events this year, to do a milk recording early so that you can assess what your results have been from your dry cow treatment. Kevin, what's your advice on that?
Well, look, the recommended advice is within 60 days of the first cow calving, and I suppose on a lot of farms nowadays, the majority of the cows probably will have calved within that 60-day period, so it is within 60 days to get your cell check reports to assess how well the dry cow period have done. So I mean, if you're start calving in the 20th of January, you're talking about having a record booked in for the 1st or 2nd week of March. Any cows you don't get to be picked up on your 2nd test then. And then every cow will have 3 tests done. A cow that might miss the first one will make the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th one, or a cow that makes the first one might necessarily make the last one. But every cow will have 3 tests, that they'll all fit in. But within 60 days of the first cow calving is recommended for Fionnuala.
Caroline, we've kind of covered this in your presentation, but it's important to ask it again. Maybe farmer wants to know, does he have to wait for individual cows to get mastitis before they can get hold of actual treatments?
No.
Okay.
No. No.
They can have some on standby.
Yes. Yes.
That's
yes.
okay. Great. Sawdust, and is sawdust good for cows bedding? Joris, you might want to take that.
Sawdust is a decent enough bedding material. Yes, obviously it's from untreated wood. That's important, right? So not chemically treated wood. There are some concerns around sawdust. Keep in mind it's an organic material, right? So it can grow bacteria, and especially something like a Klebsiella would be very typical for a bacteria, mastitis bacteria, that can grow in sawdust and would be associated with the type of environmental mastitis that you'd see with animals on sawdust. But it does work. It's good at moisture absorption. Sometimes you'd want to mix it with lime just to give it that bit of disinfection properties, because sawdust on its own doesn't really do that. Okay. Obviously, from a comfort point of view, you would want a lot of sawdust if that's your actual bedding material. So we see that very little. Usually there's rubber mats or mattresses, and then some sawdust spread on top of that for moisture absorption rather than actual comfort, if that makes sense.
Yep. Caroline, this is kind of a question, but it's also a little bit of a statement maybe. From farmer, to keep antibiotic use to a minimum, we need a guaranteed supply of vaccines, which we don't always have. And the farmer is suggesting that the department look at this and do something about this. He rightly saying that, look, they don't want to be using antibiotics on sick animals if it can be avoided through vaccinations. So you might like to comment on that.
Yeah,
certainly take that one away.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, we're aware there was a lot of issues last year, in particular with Salmonella vaccine, but there were other vaccines, particularly in sheep. We've had ongoing conversations with the manufacturers on this, and we've told them this isn't acceptable, that this leaves farmers in a very difficult position. And to acknowledge that the move towards vaccination has been fantastic. So we have set up an action group, a task force with the manufacturers, that they give us at least 3 months notice if there's a suspected shortage. And what we can do then is we can bring in a vaccine from another country. And that's what we did for the Salmonella last year. We brought in a US vaccine, which is quite difficult to bring in. There's a lot of legislation around it, but that's what we will do. And we have told the manufacturers, if we run out of stock here, we will source it elsewhere. So, that's where we're at. I suppose the key thing is that we get the information about the shortages. We have vets that contact us directly, but farmers can also contact us. There's a vet med shortages at agriculture.gov. There's an email, and I can send that around. But if farmers send us in and tell us what they're short of, we can identify if there is a real shortage, find out if there isn't, where they can get it, or we will bring in a vaccine to address that shortage. So it's just really important. We're really aware of it, and we're very keen to know as soon as possible, and we will act on it. And can I just go back to the question about the farmer, where, that they have the quantity of medicine in case they get a case of mastitis. I think we just want to be really careful here that, there needs to be ongoing veterinary oversight and supervision, because you don't really want to be paying for drugs that you won't need, and you don't want to be paying for drugs that mightn't be the right choice. So, we don't have an issue that farmers have nothing, but, the quantities have to be limited, and it is about, making sure you use the right drug when you need to use it.
Okay, thank you. Actually, we've got a question exactly on that. How do I test which antibiotic will work for me? Joris, do you want to just do a quick comment on that? Because we've got lots of questions.
Yeah, look, the gold standard, I suppose, is your culture and sensitivity, right? So you have to take a sterile milk sample from a cow, preferably a very recent case of mastitis, right? A new case of mastitis, and an animal that has not received any treatment in the last 8 weeks. Culture sensitivity will tell you which bacteria are causing the mastitis that you're experiencing. And then they will also give you an overview of which antibiotics, in the lab at least, are active against those bacteria and which ones aren't. Lab conditions different from on-farm conditions, but at least it allows you to rule out some of the treatments that are definitely not going to work.
Okay.
Caroline, just to add to Joris's comments, a lot of the odd time now we get samples into the lab in Back Western and they're contaminated, which means they're dirty. So, and look, nobody's working in a sterile environment on a farm, fully accept that. But I think just to underline Joris's point about, you know, when you're taking the sample, that the teat is clean, that you're wearing gloves, because you're wasting your time and your money if you send a sample in and it's coming full of E. coli. That, you know, in a lot of cases, if there's high growth of E. coli, that could be environmental. So just to underline that.
Yeah, we would always say that we want you to get the milk tested, not the muck tested. Caroline, another question for you. Can the department software sync the prescriptions back to the farm software?
The answer is no.
I'm guessing is that's thinking of board B and pieces like that.
Yeah, no, not at the moment. And one of the reasons why is that, well, we're not set up to do it, but at the moment, the system will accept any herd ID and any farmer name. So it mightn't be correct. So until we get this system up and running, but absolutely accept there's ways of you know, streamlining records and all that. But at the moment, it's not set up to do it. And until we get more accurate data, I don't think it's something we would consider.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to try to finish up with 2 more questions. Yours, what's a red flag and when to react to a problem? How do I know it's not just spring mastitis? You know, the cow's not just settling down. When should, this farmer wants to know, when should they start to react to, you know, they're getting some text to say that their cell count is a bit high, but what level should he actually react at, or should they react at?
Well, if you go with the classics, and that's saying if your bulk tank goes over 400,000, that is a massive red flag, okay? Because over 400,000 means you have infection in the herd. But you could argue anything over 200,000 is too high. And especially if it's a new development, if you are traditionally over 200,000, let's say between 200 and 250,000, you may not worry about a 220,000. But if this is not normal for your herd, that is a red flag as well. If we bring that down to the individual cow level, for adult cows, so not your maiden heifers that have just calved down for the first lactation, but your adult cows, 150,000 is actually where you would put the cutoff for an individual animal. If she goes over 150,000, there is very high chance that she has an infection. For a heifer, it's actually 125,000. So having that little spike at the start of lactation, which we all sort of assume is stress induced and it's about everybody settling into their new role in the dairy herd and all of that, that's fine, but that needs to settle down. If that does not come down after a couple of days, up to a week, then there is something else going on, and the bulk tank will reflect that. So I think your bulk tank is your best way to gauge it.
Okay, right. I'm going to give the last question actually back to Kevin on, and just, I suppose, a farmer wants to know, how does he register, and are they automatically enrolled because they're in Herd Plus, and they're recording with either you or Munster, or do they actually need to actively register? And if a herd isn't genotagged yet, can they still join? And
yes,
we might wrap up that after that.
Yeah, no problem. Just for part of the question, there isn't necessarily a formal sign-up process, but we will require farmers to ring in just to let us know that they want to, and we will then send out the packs. Currently, we're just looking at a small bit of what data we already have access, and I think we're kind of covered, so we don't have to get permission for any new data or anything from the farmers. So basically, it's a case of ringing up, look, I want to partake in genocells. We get everything sent out, then it's straightforward from that point of view. As regards farmers who aren't genotyped and are possibly thinking of getting genotyped to use genocells, yes, they can still get the cows genotyped. Pricing is, this is the price I got off ICBF, so it's based off if you're a member of NGP or if you're in Herd Plus. So if you're in the National Genotyping Programme or you are a member of Herd Plus, it's €18 per female. And then if you're not in the NGP or you're not a member of Herd Plus, which look, to do genocells you have to be a member of Herd Plus, but if you're not currently, you're looking at €30 a sample. So look, if you are going to use genocells, you're not genotyped, you may as well sign up to Herd Plus. You'll get your genotyping cheaper, and then you'll be able to do your genocells. But that's roughly, look, €18 if you are in it, €30 if you're not, per animal is the pricing that I got off ICBF.
Okay, thank you. As we're going to wrap up the webinar, so thank you to everybody who's joined us online. I'll try and cover some of these pieces within the next few newsletters as well, because particularly, I suppose, around the prescriptions and the genus cells, those are the two new pieces that we've got today. So it'd be great. We'll get some more information out to suppliers. Thank you very much to Caroline and to Kevin and to Joris for joining us today. And in the background, we've had Tawanda, Caroline and Ella, who've actually helped us pull everything together. Thanks to everybody who's been online and listening in. We will have this recorded, so it will actually be up on Tirlán Farm Life later on. And as always, if you've got questions on mastitis or there's any way that the milk supply team can actually help you with it, please do contact us. So thank you very much, and hopefully the rest of the calving goes okay and the weather stays good. Thank you and goodbye.